Our next guest is a friend of mine, somebody who I'm thrilled to call a friend. You all know her, of course. Maude Barlow is the national chair person of the Council for Canadians and is also the chair of the Washington-based Food and Water Watch. She's done enormous things for decades in Canada and internationally to help people understand some of the pressing issues of the day. She's been given 11 honorary doctorates, including the 2005 Wright Livelihood Award, which is known as an alternative Nobel. Okay. And of course, in 2008 and 9, she was a senior advisor on water to the President of the United Nations General Assembly. She's written 16 books. Many of you, I'm sure, have read every single one. The international bestseller Blue Covenant, The Global Water Crisis and the Coming Battle for the Right to Water is one of her most famous books. And I welcome Maude to the podium.
I do not want to spill that water on this computer. So I'm really, really careful. Thank you so much, Alana, for that beautiful introduction, and thank you all for being here on this gorgeous day and looking out at this lake. It's just a wonderful venue, and I want to thank Michael and the chapter for all the work you've put into this, Mark for opening with this just incredible dose of reality. Mark was on a number of the tours that we had last spring, and every single time Mark spoke, I learned something new. It's just incredible what waterkeepers are doing. I want to say a special thanks to our Mark Calzavera, for all the work that he does, our organizer from this region, and a special shout out to Alana. To Alexa Bradley. You're going to hear Alexa later. And she's one of the originators of this project. We'll tell you a little bit about. So you've just heard a very chilling set of stats and reality check about where we are and where this lake is. I just came from Rochester, New York yesterday. I was there the night before speaking as part of this tour. And there's a brand new study that's come out that there are 800 toxic sites that have been documented now, just in Western New York alone, and most of them right within the basin. So everybody knew that there are these old toxic sites. I mean, Rochester was the site of the Kodak company for years and years, and they just dumped, like everybody did. It was just assumed that this water was a free-for-all, and everybody dumped. But they've actually now categorized and counted and know that there are at least 800 of these toxic sites. Most of them are not being remediated. Most of them are just being watched. That's what, Mark talked about, democracy going hand in hand with a responsible environment. And even under a better administration they have in the US than they have in the past, they're still just watching these sites. They're not remediating. So we have a real fight on our hands around the lakes. I want to take a few minutes and walk us backwards outwards, and look at the global water crisis a little bit, and then come back to what we're trying to do here with this project around the lakes, because something is badly failing. When you watch what's happening with the International Joint Commission, the agreements on water quality, fisheries, and so on, the wonderful work of groups like MATS, like Sierra Club and Canadian Environmental Law Association, and so many others, Great Lakes United, work on both sides of the border. Things are getting worse, not better. And I think I want for us to think today, and that's what this tour is about, around what's wrong with the way we look at water, basically, and what's wrong with the laws and the systems that we have. Why is it getting worse? Just as a backdrop, this really is part of a global crisis. The decline in the lakes, and Lake Michigan has gone down, I kept hearing 5 feet because I've been on the American side, so the corresponding level here, but I mean, we're really talking about a very serious decline. The lakes are at the lowest level they've been since they started taking records in 1918. So I mean, we are going in the wrong direction in so many ways. And this is happening around the world, and I think it's really important for those of us who live on or near these beautiful lakes to understand the responsibility that we have to protect them, because the world is in a crisis situation due to several things. And we all learned, this is just too many planes, it'll go away. We all learned back in grade 6 or something that there's this hydrologic cycle, and there's a certain specific amount of water, and it goes round and round, and you cannot run out of it. And there it is, right? And this is actually not true. We are displacing, polluting, and mismanaging the world's available water systems so much that now we are a planet where parts of the world are actually physically running out. We're over mining our groundwater. A recent study said that we're doubling our taking of groundwater. And remember that we're using technology, borewell technology, that didn't exist, maybe 60 years ago. Really, the modern borewell technology was designed in the mid-50s, and it's grown since. And we're talking about having borewells in some of the lakes, or the tributaries of the lakes, that go as deep into the ground as Chicago skyscrapers go into the sky. We're talking really deep borewell pumping, mining, extraction. We're also extracting our rivers to death to provide food or to grow food in inappropriate ways, and then we're shipping that water around the world as in a form that's called virtual water. And this is where the water that you need to produce whatever it is that you're producing, usually a commodity, is shipped out of not only the watershed, but it's shipped out of your country perhaps as well, because we're now in this global food trade, and that's a huge part of the story that we're not talking about. So we are looking at depletion of current water sources. There's a large study that was done by the big water and food companies around the world, coordinated by the World Bank a couple of years ago, and they said by 2030 the demand for water in our world will outstrip supply by 40%. It's just an absolutely stunning statistic. And the conflicts that we're beginning to see around water, where whole communities, whole cities are actually finding that they're coming to the bottom of their water table, are extraordinary. The way I image it is that there's a lot of people around a bathtub, and the bathtub has water in it, and everybody's got a straw and a blindfold on, and suddenly, there's lots of water until suddenly there's no water for anyone. That's what David Suzuki calls exponential overuse of a resource. So we can't count it. It's not 1 and 1 and 2 and 2. It's 2 times 2 and 4 times 4 and so on, and it's exponential, and suddenly it's gone. And so we are seeing conflicts between the needs and demands of great big thirsty cities. I spent a lot of time in Australia, and I'm always stunned at the difference between the way people look at water if they live in the rural communities, where when it's drought time and there's a fire and you've got a tree anywhere near you, you run like hell, because if that tree catches fire, it doesn't burn, it explodes, right? They understand what they're dealing with. Whereas in the cities, it's all boutique water, and just this notion that we'll never run out. There really is an urban-rural or urban wilderness split. But the biggest split that we see, of course, is between those who can afford water in parts of the world where you have to pay for it, and those who cannot. And we know that the global water crisis is the greatest threat to children. It's the greatest killer of people. It kills more people than all forms of violence put together, including war in the global south. Importantly and interestingly, though, we think we've got to stop thinking of this poverty or water cutoffs as being just a global south issue. As Alexa knows, we're working with wonderful people in inner city Detroit who've had their water cut off, many thousands of them, because they can't afford the water rates. And I'm just finishing a new book on water, so I've got tons of new stuff in my head, and one of them is how fast the price of water is going up in the U.S. in urban centers. It's just skyrocketing. And as we have a world that's moving towards greater disparities between rich and poor, even in the global north, even in rich countries, plus rising water costs, we're going to start seeing water like rent or mortgages or food with this price going up. We're going to start seeing people not being able to afford it. And there are stories in inner city Detroit where social services has come in and taken away the children because there's no water in the home. And we're talking about people who have to go out with buckets and pails and stuff and go into local parks or into local public places and pour water and bring it home. We're not talking about just the images that we've traditionally had in our minds. And it's very important for us to follow what's happening in Europe, because these austerity measures, this austerity program that is being imposed on particularly the countries in the south, has included the privatization of water. There's a big fight back against it, and it's a very exciting project. I was in Germany not long ago working with some of the unions in the public sector, or the people fighting for public sector water there. They've got almost 2 million signatures across Europe now for a referendum to stop the privatization of water, so there's a real fight back. But what's happening is that the price of water is being dramatically raised in many of these countries, and people are being cut off. So this is a worldwide phenomenon where we really are seeing, as I predicted in Blue Gold all that time ago, 10, 11 years ago, that those who cannot afford it would increasingly be cut off water. And so we need to understand that this is a fundamental issue of human rights. And it was my honor and pleasure, Anna, to be involved in the UN, in the struggle at the UN for the right to water, and was there the day in July 28th, 2010, when the United Nations General Assembly did end up voting on the right to water. And I thought we were going to lose. Several of the team from the council were with me, and I was holding their hands and saying, no, we're not going to win today, but it's okay. We'll be back next year or 5 years or whatever, we will win. But I was wrong, thankfully, and 122 countries voted in favor of it. Canada, which led the fight against it, to our shame, did not even have the courage to vote against it. They abstained, or Canada abstained, as did 40 other countries. But once it's adopted, that obligation belongs to all countries, whether or not they signed on to it. So Canada is now obliged to provide the clean, accessible water for all Canadians, including people in First Nations, especially people in First Nations communities, rural communities, wherever it's happening, wherever there are issues of lack of access to water, or where a company is coming in and fouling your water. You actually have redress now under these provisions of water being a fundamental human right. So I just want to place that as a backdrop to this discussion, because I spend a great deal of my time traveling. I spend a great deal of my time in communities in places that have no water, where the issue is here now. And it always astounds me that we will have yet another election in this country, or a presidential election in the United States, and the issue of water is not being discussed. It always just absolutely amazes me. It's as if it's like, see no evil, hear no evil, fear no evil. We think that somehow some technology is going to come along. So it's really important that we understand that we're a world, a planet in crisis, and we are literally coming to the bottom of the water table in a number of communities. So what does that bring us to here? Well, I'm not going to list the problems with the Great Lakes. Mark has done that brilliantly. I want to outline and underline what a combination of climate and over-extraction has done, which is the decrease in the level of the lakes. And I want to add to not only the issue of climate, and we know that the ice pack is down about 70% in the last 3 decades. So of course the evaporation is happening faster, quicker, and more relentlessly. But I want to also put into the mix the notion that there are 175,000 square kilometers of food production around the lakes, and a great deal of that goes to export. So again, it's not as if we have a pipeline sucking the water out of the lakes. We've got a compact that says we can't do that, although it's got great big holes in it, and it grandfathers some very bad practices, and it allows bottled water. But the compact does say you can't put a pipe in these lakes and pump it out. On the other hand, that's exactly what's happening with virtual food exports, and I really think we need to get a handle on this issue. In the new book, I have a whole chapter on food, the global food trade system, and water, and I'm absolutely convinced that the single most important thing we can do for water is to bring us back to local sustainable food production. This is the most abusive issue around, or the most abusive practice around water, although energy comes a quick second. The International Energy Agency says that by 2035, conventional energy, including biofuels, which I now consider conventional and bad, are going to be doubling their water intake and their water consumption. So between our bad food practices and our bad energy practices, we're taking the declining stocks of fresh water in the world and we're finishing them off. This is really, really part of a story that hasn't been told, I don't think.